Good morning, councillors. Good morning, executive, and good morning to those joining us today in the digital gallery. It's my privilege to resume the ordinary meeting that was adjourned on the 3rd of August as a result of limitations under the COVID restrictions of that day. And to note in doing so, a full attendance of councillors and a full attendance of the executive with us today. Therefore, there are no apologies. But it's a delight to welcome Pastor Peter Geyer, who is from the Fassifern Lutheran Church, who is going to lead us in prayers via teleconference. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning all. Thank you very much for that introduction.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. We're in your hands.
Okay. Look, I just wanted to read you a passage of scripture and then have a prayer for you guys today, and let you know certainly that you're in our regular prayers for our congregations over here. And look, we're living difficult times, and certainly we give you our prayerful support. I'll just read to you from Romans chapter 13, verse 1. It says there, everyone must submit himself to the governing authority, for there's no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. So that is just saying, folks, that you have a divine commission from God to bring law and order and well-being in our community. And we as Christians, a Christian community, are committed to support you in that. And whatever regulations and laws that are brought upon us by local government, state government or federal government, we are under obligation to be obedient, law-abiding citizens, because to disobey those authorities is to disobey God himself, who has instituted those authorities. So that gives you a special privilege, I guess, in many ways, but also a great responsibility to ensure that the laws, regulations put in place for our community are there for the well-being of all people. And so I just wanted to remind you of that and encourage you in that this morning. Can we have a word of prayer then? Dear Father in heaven, we just thank you for those who give of their time and talents to serve you in the capacities that they are called to do so, Lord, and we ask your blessing upon the meeting that's taking place this day. May the decisions and discussions that take place there be to your glory, to the good of all there present today, and also the well-being of our community. Heavenly Father, continue to add your blessing to all of our leaders over there. Be with their families and friends, give them a peaceful home life and social life so that they can focus on the work that you've called them to do. And we just pray, Lord, that as a community we give them the respect and honour and recognition due to the offices that they're called to perform. We ask this and your continued blessing for all in our community in the name of our Lord and Saviour, Jesus the Christ. Amen. And the Lord bless and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord look upon you guys with his favour and grant you all his peace. Amen.
Thank you indeed, Pastor. Greatly appreciated your words. Of course, you're welcome to continue to join us for the meeting, but understand you also have some busy challenges in your leadership role in community. And again, we're very grateful for your participation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, and God bless your day.
Thank you. Councillors, we turn to item 5 in our agenda. Are there any declarations of prescribed or declarable conflicts of interest for matters before the meeting today? I'll take silence as there being no such declarations. There are no announcements before us today. There are no deputations or petitions before us today. So we move to item 8, confirmation of the meeting minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, there is a recommendation before us that the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 20th of July 2021 be adopted. I seek a mover. Councillor McConnell, any questions to those minutes?
Just notice that the amendment we made for 10.2 has been included in those minutes. So I'd just like to highlight that and thank the staff for putting those in.
Thank you. Any other questions, clarifications? If not, seek a seconder. Councillor West, any wish to speak further? Anyone wishing to seek leave to speak against or additionally? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour? That's the minutes of the prior meeting are carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. There's no business before us today rising from those previous minutes. We turn to section 10 then, the business before the meeting today, and we start with item 10.1 and we turn to the GM, Customer and Regional Prosperity.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors, officers and everyone listening online. 10.1 is regarding a new register of active grants and subsidies that Council has developed. It's a newly created document that enables us to be open and transparent about all of the grants that we have received and those that are active and currently associated with projects being delivered. I do have with me a Special Projects Officer, Margie Jackson, who facilitated putting this together with our Grants Officer and a number of staff right across the organisation. And I also like to acknowledge the General Manager of Assets, Environmental and Sustainability for his staff and their input into this register. So perhaps Margie would just give us a quick overview as the intent of this and how we propose to continue to keep this as a live document on our website. Sorry, we're just checking your audio, Margie.
Just have a disconnection challenge for
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. First of all, I'd like to just point out that this is a new and exciting thing that Council is doing, and it gives our residents and everyone across the region an opportunity to actually see the level of grants that we currently have active. Just a few things to reiterate some of the things that are actually in the report is that this is just our active grants and subsidies, and when we say active, this means that they're approved, and which means that Council has an executed funding agreement that is and we've received permission in writing from the funding body that we can actually release the information. And this is, just remember, this is despite some announcements that may have been made at other times and will be made at other times about grants that we haven't actually received the executed agreement. So we are not have authority to release that information as of yet. So these are the ones that are actually just active. The other thing is, I think this is, the intent of this is to give an overview of our current grants and subsidies, and it's not intended for details about specific grants or projects, and it's not to provide live status updates about those particular projects within the grants. Most of the information on this register was designed to have it's easily readable and presented in a format, and it's working to achieve the best possible outcomes that we could do for our community. So I might just walk you really quickly through the grant register. It's divided firstly by the funding, who's funding it. So for example, the first page is the Queensland government. So all these programs are funded wholly and solely through the Queensland government. And then it gives you a list of our projects within that program and a high level funding view of what those projects are funded for and if council is providing any additional funding or if there's third-party contributions. You'll also notice there's a column there that has the type of funding. Now, there's three types of funding that we've determined. There's a subsidy, and that is the sum of the money allocated by the Australian or Queensland government for a specific purpose. An allocated grant. This is determined at a level of funding allocated to council by the Australian or Queensland governments, and projects within that funding program are nominated by council and they're not assessed against other submissions by other applicants, but individually against the program criteria within that program. So, and our last one is a competitive grant, and that's funding that is approved by the Australian or Queensland government, that it has an open and closing date for applications, and grant applications from eligible organizations such as council are assessed against the set criteria and the outcome determined. So that's competitive with other grants. So then the next, down on the next program, we have the SEQ, so our grants that are allocated through COMSEC, which is the Council of Mayors at SEQ, and those are usually just these two programs. Then we go into the funding that is co-funded, that is between council and, between Queensland and Australian government. So that's those two entities put into that funding. And finally, the last list is funded through the Australian government itself. Just a note to be aware of, will be going up on the website for everyone to see. And please remember that this is going to be updated 6 monthly or as required. So again, it is not a live, as we get every new grant in, it will not be updated. Also, that the register is going to be located on our council page under the financial information heading, and that should anyone from the public wish to obtain further information from any of these specific grant projects, there'll be links to the media releases that should help them give you more live updates and what's happening more regularly. And please watch for those media releases as they come through, and or previous media releases will have links to that. Is there any, that's it for me?
I thought you might just outline the footnote that will be added to the document that will go live today, which is slightly different to the version that was published only due to the timing of this report.
Sure. So in the register, you'll notice it is a little bit different than the actual version. The new one that's going to go on the register, we've got a footnote for building our regions round 5. And because there's a little bit of confusion between that and the Building Better Regions Fund. So the footnote that will explain those two grants is going to be this. The Building Better Regions Fund, BBRF, Round 4 guidelines stipulate the guarantee, which is council, must contribute 50.11% of the total funds for the nominated project. In this instance, council contributes for the BBRF Beaudesert Town Centre Revitalization Project are made up of $3,750,000 of building our regions. So that of that the $3,750,000 that is included in the BBRF is also coming from our Building Our Regions Fund, Round 5 grant funds, and $460,065 of actual council funds are as part of the BOR funding agreement. Therefore, the total council contributions for the BBRF Round 4 Beaudesert Town Centre Revitalization Project of the $4,210,065 are derived from the BOR, which is Building Our Regions Round 5, for the same project.
We just wanted to add that clarity, Mayor, because we have received the grants in two places, because one is a state government and one is a Australian government grant. However, those two grants together make up that one project. So I thank Councillor Enright for drawing that question to officers so that we could add that clarity to the document.
Thank you. And just for context, for clarity, that's a similar arrangement to, can I just clarify, that was a similar arrangement that occurred for the Boona Town Centre.
That's correct.
Project funding. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, councillors, questions to clarify to the report? Councillor Swanborough.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, just one question. I think it's a great thing to have this information available. Is there any reason why we couldn't update it quarterly rather than 6 monthly, just to make it more relevant data?
The data is very relevant. A lot of the grants rounds that we apply for, some take longer than 6 months for their assessment timeframe. And by the time, the point's well made by Margie in her introduction about the timing of when we understand the grant has been approved, then negotiate the final funding agreement, then go through the process of accepting that, and then the media announcements, that can be in and of itself longer than 6 months. So, and for officers time to continually keep updating when it might not have any changes in that shorter period of time in that 3 months. We've talked about it at great length and feel that this is the most appropriate timing to keep this up to date. And also noting that our research shows that there are very few, if any, other councils across Queensland that have this level of transparency. No one has a grants register of this type. Margie did quite extensive research to try and ask how they structured, other governments, local governments structured their register, so we could consider the timing, and we were not able to find any anywhere. So I guess if we were more successful in a quarterly period and receiving more and more grants, then we would be able to revise that and come back to council. But our best advice as officers, from a timing perspective, both in the cycles of the grants and our officer capacity, that really 6 months is the ideal timing.
Thank you for that clarification. Further questions, Councillor McConnell?
Yeah, just a quick one. Tees Bridge doesn't seem to be on the list of bridges. Did we not get funding through federal government?
That's quite an interesting eccentricity of that one, is that the funding was actually granted to Logan, and we then provided funding, as the Tees Bridge is a boundary bridge. So theoretically, we didn't receive the funding because the applicant was Logan City. However, having said that, we could certainly consider whether that would be appropriate to list that down on the listing, but however, it's not a grant that is ours.
Okay.
If I could just add to that, I think that's an important differentiation. These are grants that this organisation has achieved.
Yeah.
I think you would report on that project in your other capital reporting and other project reporting. Am I correct, Chris?
That's correct. We certainly would report on that as part of other capital updates.
So, but part of our media release when we started the project was that we received funding from, we received funding from the from that grant.
I think the media release, and I'm not going to say I recall the words, but the project itself received funding from the federal government, which was via an application made by Logan City.
Okay.
So technically Logan received the funds. We are participating in the project.
Okay. So they received our 25%.
Yes, they put the project together. They received the 50% or the amount that was eligible under the funding guidelines.
Yeah.
We then contributed a portion, which was the half of the remainder of the project funds.
All right.
Mayor, if I could just make one other comment. In the room with us today is Nicole Williams. Nicole is our grants officer who facilitates across the organisation the submission of these grants, with just about every other department in the organisation contributing. And I think you will see by the bottom line totals on this register, this organisation has a lot to be proud of in terms of what it's been able to achieve in grant funding in recent times.
Thank you. And yes, I I would agree that there's certainly some excellent development work there that's allowed us to have that success. Can I just continue through the clarifications at the moment, Councillor McConnell?
The next one is page 11 under the Australian Government Roads for Recovery Program. There's a figure in the project list of 5.4 million, but nothing in the total funded amount. Page 11.
So line item 2.
Line 2, yeah, line 2. There's nothing in the total funded. Now, the completion date obviously would be June 2024, I gather.
Yes, looking at the way it's presented in the table, it's actually with the second line below that actually has the details of what's actually funded in each year. With that funding guideline, it is over a number of years, and we tend to try and average that over the full funding period. So both the line above and the line below, well, lines 2 and 3 relate to one another.
So can I just to clarify that, for the purposes of looking at active funding for this year, the line 3 that refers to the allocation for 21-22 represents a subset of line 2.
Yes, that's correct.
Just for
that's
those
correct.
listening in. So
yeah.
They're not separate entries. One's an overarching longitudinal, one specific for this year.
You can see by the dates listed there, Mayor, 2019 to 2024.
No, I was just crystallising. I can see that. I was just crystallising for those listening in who can't see. They're just listening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for clarifications to this report, councillors? Okay, well, thank you. I think just as a general comment, it's very impressive to see that consolidated list and the success that's been gained, and certainly would agree that the ability to put forward high quality researched business cases has certainly been adding to great success in that regard, and acknowledge the efforts to achieving that. Thank you. Councillors, if there are no other questions, we do have a recommendation in 3 parts that I'll ask the GM to introduce.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. Today, our recommendation is that 1, Council adopt its first register of active grants and subsidies current as at 23 July 2021 that lists programs funded by Queensland Government, jointly funded by the Queensland and Australian governments and funded by the Australian Government. That Council publish the register of active grants and subsidies on Council's website, and note the register will be updated and presented to Council on a 6-monthly basis and updated on the Council's website as required. And 3, that Council acknowledge the preparation and publishing of the publishing of the register supports Council's deliberate strategy and ongoing commitment to being open and transparent, and ensures the community has clarity and understanding of the current grant and subsidy funded programs.
Thank you. Councillors, we have a recommendation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Enright. Any additional questions? Any additional discussion, councillors, before I seek a seconder? Councillor West, you wish to speak to your motion, Councillor Enright?
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly would. I think this summary of the grants and subsidies is a wonderful document to bring together the 40 to 50 different grants that this organisation has been successful in achieving. It not only is the opportunity to view the various funding streams that come through, it provides an opportunity to see the diverse areas that this external funding provides this organisation to deliver improved services and facilities to our community. I commend the staff on the compilation of this report, but not nearly as much as for the efforts in submitting these grant applications and being successful. It is a huge task, but it is something that is valued for our community in allowing us to deliver services more quickly for our community than being funded purely by council funds. And I congratulate the whole organisation for the ability to achieve such great success in this, achieving the grants for our community, for us to provide a greater service for the people that we represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? I would just speak additionally if no one else wishes to, and just one of the things that I think is worth highlighting in this, certainly the excellent professional capacity that's helped put the business cases up, that grant funding programs have very specific terms to them, and putting forward projects that you can demonstrate relevant against those criteria is an art form, and it's greatly appreciated. Secondly, it is good to reflect, and for our community to also recognise and acknowledge both the state, particularly the state and federal governments, for having some recurring programs, not just ad hoc programs. And we, along with other councils, continue to lobby, particularly state government, to give more certainty about the nature of those funding programs, so that they're better able to plan into long-term financial forecasting. However, what this schedule will allow the community to see is that there are some significant programs that continue to recur in multiple rounds that are allowing us are really giving us the only opportunity that we have to deal with some fundamental challenges to our underlying asset structure in the region that we could not otherwise afford. And I would acknowledge both in supporting the motion, acknowledge and express appreciation to both the state and federal governments for that level of commitment that gives us that capacity. Anyone else wishing to speak additionally? Otherwise, Councillor, you wish to close? We put the motion as shown on the screen. Councillor, those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, officers, for presenting that new initiative, and more success with the grants. We move to item 10.2. Councillors, on page 12 of your report. Again, GM.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. The relevant officers are just entering the room, so I welcome them. Item 10.2 is MCU 20/050, development permit for the material change of use of tourist cabins for 11 tourist cabins at 1 to 11 Eagles Retreat Place, Tamborine Mountain, and it's described as Lot 4 on RP 82621. I have officers, as I said, join us this morning, and I'm going to ask that Mark Lohman lead the presentation on this report.
Thank you, Deborah, and good morning, Council. Item 10.2 relates to the application for a development permit for material change of use for 11 cabins at 1 to 11 Eagles Retreat Place, Tamborine Mountain. The application was lodged on the 7th of May 2020 last year. The application was assessed under the Bow Desert Planning Scheme following a superseded planning scheme request. Pursuant to the Bow Desert Shire Planning Scheme 2007, an impact assessable development is required as the site is located in the escarpment precinct, or escarpment protection precinct of the Tamborine Mountain Zone. The proposed development includes 11 cabins comprising of 5 different designs. The applicant advised that the designs assist to provide variation in the built form when viewed from within the site and from external properties, and provides a variety of cabin options for the guests. All cabins have been designed to ensure at least 1 bedroom and bathroom, and the main living space is accessible for persons with disabilities. Those rooms that are not accessible for people with disabilities are intended to be occupied by the carers and family members of those people. A communal recreational facility is exclusively for the use of the guests, is located towards the centre of the site and is to be constructed into the hillside and be part of the natural topography with landscaping and green coloured roofs. The communal facilities including a wellness centre, sauna, steam room and massage suites, a gym, horizon edge pool, games room and a mix of indoor and outdoor breakout and barbecue spaces. The proposed cabins are all 2 to 3 stories within the height limits required by the planning scheme. The intended uses do conflict with the Temporary Mountain Zone Code and specific outcomes of the Tourist Cabin Code, and is affected by development constraints such as bushfire and steep slope. The applicant has supplied a needs assessment as justification for disabled respite, with a focus for catering on members of the disabled community. However, the use applied for is not a community care centre under the planning scheme, which is probably a better definition in this case. Tourist cabins is a broader definition and includes accommodating persons away from their normal place of residence. So it's open to any tourists effectively. The land is subject to steep slope and is heavily vegetated to the south of this portion with state protected fauna and flora. The application was publicly notified from the 18th of September to the 12th of October in 2020. Council received 232 properly made submissions, and there were 13 submissions that were not properly made. All of the submissions were against the development. The assessment has found that proposed development was not, or has not demonstrated compliance with the key provisions of the planning scheme, and that compliance cannot be achieved through the imposition of reasonable or relevant conditions, and as such it is recommended that the application be refused. Now, since the report and its recommendation was published on Council's ordinary meeting agenda, the applicant has sought to exercise their option and their right to initiate a deemed refusal on this application. For impact accessible applications, applicants can claim a deemed refusal where the application is not decided within the statutory timeframes. And as with many complex development assessments and meeting Council's statutory timeframes can be somewhat problematic. So our preference from an officer point of view is always to prepare considered reports to ensure that we advise Council in the best possible way. For this application, the applicant has chosen to exercise their right to claim a deemed refusal, and they've lodged a notice of appeal on the 2nd of August, and that was the day before the scheduled meeting of this meeting being the 3rd of August. This action does not in any way affect Council or the community's ability to respond to the appeal any differently than if Council had refused the application. In effect, the court now becomes the assessment manager and the application is assessed anew. The ordinary meeting of Council no longer needs to decide this application. Strictly speaking, the application has already taken to be refused. The matter is still presented to Council, though, to ascertain a formal position on the application, albeit now for the purpose of the appeal, rather than actually deciding the application. Otherwise, one of the first steps by the appellant in a deemed refusal is to request Council's formal response to the application. Submitters would also be formally contacted by the appellant, whereby they can still participate in any appeal should they wish to do so. So therefore, the officer recommendation for this report has been amended and it reflects the deemed refusal provision. So without reading it in full, the revised recommendation is that that council note that the notice of appeal filed on the deemed refusal for the following property, and that council adopts the following reasons for refusal for the purposes of the appeal. And so those reasons are unchanged from the original report. To be clear, council still has the right to make its own decision in this matter and decide whether they support the application or otherwise. Should it wish to indicate support to the application, it can still do so, and this will be relayed to the court accordingly. So council still has the choice whether we support or otherwise the application. Should there be any specific questions, I have with me Development Assessment Officers Wayne Jarrett and Kobe Lane to assist council in its deliberations.
Thank you. That's a good introduction. Councillors, obviously this is something that's had a lot of focus. Are there any questions for clarification to the report and the update just provided? Councillor McConnell?
Can't say I'm the new kid on the block anymore, but it just seems a bit strange that it wasn't brought to council prior to them being able to do a deemed refusal. Wouldn't it be our job or our responsibility to refuse this, not let it lapse?
Is the question about the timing?
Yeah.
Councillor, just try and make it clear. So perhaps you want to add clarity to the earlier comment, Manager?
So with the Planning Act, through the Development Assessment Rules, it sets the timeframes that council has to process applications. In regard to rather complex applications, particularly those with substantial submissions, the time required to prepare those reports is substantial. The ability to properly consider those applications, prepare the reports and get it onto council agendas in time to get it to council within those time periods is, as I say, quite problematic, and then quite often we don't meet those timeframes. It's not an unusual situation, and I say that we as in general planning assessment across Queensland. In this case, we did seek an extension from the applicant through to the 30th of July, and they were quite aware that we were processing or intending to put to council on the 3rd of August, and they were comfortable with that at the time.
Perhaps a supplementary clarification. Is it common for complex matters to go beyond the prescribed time frame, and how is that typically dealt with?
Yeah. So it's probably more the case they would go over time than not in your complex ones. As a rule, our officers are in close contact with the applicants during that period, and either formal or informal extensions of time are agreed to. Look, I would always err on the side of caution in preparing reports that, particularly as they come to council and the timeframes limitation that impose, I'd always err on the side of preparing a report that was properly considered, all the information there, rather than rushing a report to meet the timeframe set under the Development Assessment Rules. And I think that's the best way that council can truly consider an application, is if the reports are prepared and finalised in a considered way.
Yeah, and I can understand the manager's points there, but my concern is that this responsibility was taken out of the hands of the elected officials. I'm not going to say it's fortunate that it came up that their recommendation was to refuse it, but if it was to grant it and we don't meet it, it's then deemed a refusal. So how would that stand?
So if council were to seek to support this application, they can do so in their recommendation, and that would be relayed back through our legal people to the court. And we would go through a mediation process or the like to establish the conditions similar to what we would do in an approval process. The other factor in this is that the community also have and maintain their rights to appeal. So those people that are properly made submitters. In some respects, well, in all respects actually, the rights of council, the applicant and the submitters have not altered by this process. So it goes to court, which is probably where this application was going to end up one way or another. And it will be considered, and all parties to the application, being the applicant, council and the submitters, all will still have the same opportunities they would have had council refused.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Swanborough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The court documents indicate that the last day for a council decision was the 31st of July, and we were looking at the meeting just a few days later on the 3rd of August. Look, I understand the nuances of determining planning applications, but what does concern me is that, you know, this is only one of a number of very complex applications that have been put in relation to Tamborine Mountain. We've got 2 more that I know that are very serious as well. And I was just wondering what steps are being taken to ensure that we meet the appropriate guidelines by deciding them within the required time period under the Planning Act.
It's part of our role to plan our work structures and the like, and where needed, bring in additional resources if we need to. Look, I think it's fair to, there needs to be an understanding that we don't have unlimited resources within our department, particularly when we have multiple complex applications at one time. It does put a strain on staff and our resources. Our DA planners are working on between 15 and 20 applications at any one time at different stages of their processing. It's part of the job that we plan ahead as much as possible to meet the timeframes.
Thank you. I think that's probably any further questions, Councillor?
Just that there is just one more question. It was just in relation to the wording in this report in the assessment of and this I'm talking about page, let's get my glasses, page 57 of the report, and it says in relation to submissions, and I get this all the time, and I just want to make it all cleared up and bed this down forever. It says, during the assessment of the public submissions, it is important to note that 245 submissions, some not properly made, were the result of a standardised pro forma. My question is, why is it important to note that these submissions were received by a pro forma? My understanding is that all submissions are of equal value and they represent the views, whether they're standardised or not, of every person who makes a submission.
I think it's good information for council to be aware of in making their considerations. It also probably gives some context around when we identify the issues that are raised in the submissions, that those comments or those issues are fairly uniform across, and that we don't have 245 individual submissions that are all, have a whole range of different issues. we've got 245 that have pretty much standard issues. So that's why, in the assessment of submissions, the numbers of issues raised is probably more limited than you would expect from 245 individual submissions.
Thank you.
I thank you for that explanation, which I accept. Just noting also that, there is this perception in the community that council perhaps doesn't take standardised pro forma submissions as being weighted equally important as individual submissions, and I just wanted to note that that's not the case according to the advice we've received today.
Any further points of clarification to the report, councillors? If not, GM, sorry, Councillor McGuinness?
Yes, Mayor, I might just follow up on the question from Councillor McConnell. Is there any stages, Manager, where this has happened, a deemed refusal? Is there any can it be approved is there a situation the other side of the coin, let's say, that can be approved, just for clarification, whether it's for this or other? It's not in this case, but other cases, just for clarification.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. There are two processes. There's one which is a deemed refusal, as we've talked about, but there's also a deemed approval, and that applies in code assessable applications. So with code assessment, it's generally for development which is more likely to be considered consistent within that zone, which is why they're code accessible. If we don't meet timeframes on those, the applicants can claim a deemed approval. And with that comes generally standardised conditions from state. So they are much more critical that they're processed in time frame, because yes, you could potentially lose lots of capacity for council to impose appropriate conditions and the like. So yeah, we're very conscious of those.
Thank you, Councillor McGuinness. If not, GM, if we proceed with the recommendation for the meeting today.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation today, the revised recommendation that officers are putting forward for your consideration is 1, that council note the notice of appeal filed against the deemed refusal of the development in respect to the following property. The real property description of Lot 4 RP 82621 at the address of 1-11 Eagles Retreat Place, Tamborine Mountain. The site area is 19,959 square metres and the proposal was for a tourist park with tourist cabins. 2, that council adopt the following reasons for a refusal for the purposes of the appeal. And Mayor, with your forbearance, given that this was a revised recommendation, are you wanting me to read 1 through 5 so that the gallery can hear?
Yes, please.
Reason number 1, the proposed development does not comply with strategic framework, local strategies for Tamborine Mountain Zone 1, 3, 6 and 9 of the Beaudesert Shire Planning Scheme 2007. Reason 2, the proposed development does not comply with the overall outcomes of 001, 002, 004, 006, 007, 0025, 0029, 052 and 0058, and specific outcomes of SO8, SO11 of the Tamborine Mountain Zone Code, SO1, SO2, SO4, SO5 of the Escarpment Protection Precinct. Reason 3, the proposed development does not comply with the overall outcome of 00B and specific outcomes of SO1, SO2, SO3, SO4 and SO6 of the Tourist Cabin Code. Reason 4, the proposed development does not comply with the overall outcomes of 00AI, 00A2, sorry, 00A1, 00A2, 00AV, 00D, and specific outcomes of SO12, SO28 of the Parking and Servicing Code. And 5, that there are no relevant matters to support an approval of the proposed development.
Thank you. 2 years to read through. I seek a mover. Councillor McGuinness, any additional questions to the GM? Councillor Swanborough.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just in relation to number 5 on that recommendation, is that a wise or correct statement? There are no relevant matters to support an approval of the proposed development. I mean, when I read the assessment, you know, there are plenty of things that are for and against, but on balance, I would say that the recommendation is absolutely correct. But I just wonder whether that last number 5, you know, puts us in a situation where we're saying...
So, Councillor, you've asked the question, perhaps let the officer reply.
Sure. Yeah, I can see where the question comes from. It comes from the Planning Act, and it's a quote out of the Act effectively that we use to make that, and that to do a refusal, that's the wording that's in the Act. Yeah, yeah. So, but I understand where that confusion might be, but it's taken in the overall sense.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay. Any other questions? I seek a seconder. Councillor McConnell. Councillor McGuinness, you wish to speak?
Only in support of in saying this is the right way to go. It's unfortunate that it had to end up in court, that it couldn't have been done in earlier, but it's this is a correct procedure to follow through now, and I commend the officers and the work that they've done towards this.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour, councillors? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, manager and officers. This certainly, you know, rates the word complexity is not overused to describe some of these matters, and thank you for your diligence to focus on the detail to get to good outcomes. We move to item 10.3 on page 77 of your report, councillors, and I ask the GM Asset Environmental Sustainability to introduce, please.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors, executive, other staff, and those listening in. Item 10.3 is around an identified issue with regard to rural road numbering and with regards to Chingy Creek Road and Mount Gibbs Road. I've actually got Manager Maintenance and Operations Scott Osman here who will go through the details of the issue.
Thank you, GM.
Thank you, Chris. Morning, Mayor, councillors and executive. Yeah, during our course of our investigations, we've discovered that there's about a kilometre portion of the existing Mount Gibbs Road that has been named in error. The residents out there, there's 8 affected properties, all actually have used the actual address of Chingy Creek Road, although the road itself is formally known as Mount Gibbs Road. I'm not sure why the anomaly was created at the start, but obviously, as you can see on the map on the screen there, point A is just a point in the middle of a straight section of road. So that highlighted section there is all actually Mount Gibbs Road, but the adjoining properties all have the residential addresses of Chingy Creek Road. Okay, so we did contact all the residents affected, and they're all in agreement that they would like that they had no concerns with it being changed to Chingy Creek Road. And we did go out to advertise in the local papers for 4 weeks as well in regards to the proposed name change. We received no correspondence in regards to that as well. So the proposal is that we will update our asset register to formally name that portion of road to Chingy Creek Road to align with the existing residential properties. And we will move the actual street sign from Mount Gibbs to start there at point B, which is actually turn to a different road as well. So it actually does signify a point that you can, that would stand as a point of difference as well.
Thank you for that introduction. Councillors, you've had time to consider this. Any questions to the report? Appears not. It's been matter quite understood. GM, I'll ask you to introduce the recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation for item 10.3 is that 1, Council approve the renaming of a portion of Mount Gibbs Road to Chingy Creek Road, Chingy Creek, and the 2 existing signage be replaced to indicate the road name change, and 3, Council's road name register be updated accordingly.
Yeah, I seek a mover. Councillor West. Any additional questions, councillors? Any additional discussion to that item? If not, seek a seconder. Councillor Chalk. Wish to speak, Councillor West?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, I just want to acknowledge the infrastructure team who picked this anomaly up, which has obviously been there for quite a number of years. And so that is really very positive. And also thank you to the residents who live out there, because these things don't, when you have name changes, they don't come without inconvenience to their lives and to all their important documents. But this is certainly a very beneficial for the future, because obviously we need to know that emergency services can get to these properties in a timely manner and to the correct property.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally to this motion? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, officers, for that involvement. We move to item 10.4, page 81 in your reports, councillor. Back to you, GM.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 10.4 deals with Council's successful applications with regard to 5 projects under the Black Spot, Federal Government Black Spot Funding Program. I'd like to draw your attention to the 5 projects. We have Beachmont Road, east of Roads Withering, with the changes as listed, Munbilla Road, Ellis and Jackson Road intersection, Burnham Street and James Street intersection, Beachmont Road, again with a 500 metre section near Farm Grove, and Burnham Street and Ellis Street intersection at Bay Desert. Also mentioned that we did put for, an application forward for Beachmont Road for $191,000. The application, when received, came to us as saying $181,000. So I will be making a slight adjustment to the recommendation, which will see a $10,000 less at the total as well. We are still in negotiations with the relevant departments to ascertain to whether that was a typing error that when it's sent through to us. However, given that we've received the funding agreements as stated, we believe that to be the most appropriate way forward to continue working towards delivery of these projects this year.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions to the report? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a clarification that these 5 projects are fully funded by the federal government.
So from a clarification point of view, our original estimate for the first project, Beachmont Road, east of Roads Road, Withering, is $191,000. With the funding agreement coming through at $181,000, we certainly would look to the fact is we can't adjust the scope of the project, so there may be a need to for council to fund $10,000 of that. However, we are still in negotiations with the relevant departments to whether that would be required. And given that the project itself, all these projects are based off design estimates, we would certainly look towards ways in which we could deliver within the $181,000 that is presented. However, our initial estimates are it is a value of $191,000. So that's a fairly long answer to your short question.
Sorry, Chris, I probably should have said with the exclusion of that first one, which is to be clarified. So if you can extend that to the remaining.
Yes, I can confirm that's 100% funding proposal from the Black Spot funding. They're generally always to be 100% funded. The clarification we've sought on that first one is whether there's an aspect of it that was considered not to be appropriate under the funding regime. As yet, we have not received an answer to that.
Thank you for that clarification. Any further questions, Councillor Swanborough?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I was just wondering if the General Manager could tell us how that crash data is collated and assessed for the Scenic Rim.
I'll try and be brief. The crash data is actually analysed from those accidents that actually have resulted in either a hospitalisation or serious injury. Generally speaking, the data that's collected nowadays is not based on impacts or property damage. So years ago, when I talk years ago, we're talking probably 10 years or more, it was whenever police were called to an incident. Generally speaking, that data is not recorded by the state and not actually utilised when these programs are put together. So it would be helpful because there are a number of locations historically that may have a large number of crash events, but they're low speed, low impact, don't result in an injury as such, but their sheer volume actually shows that there is an issue at that point. So we still welcome feedback from our residents and users of the road network when it comes to sites that do have regular occurrences. And we certainly do put that through our own prioritisation process when we actually assess a 10-year capital works program.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Swanborough, you have another question?
Yeah, so just with the injuries, how do we get the data indicating that there have been injuries as a result of the crashes? So
there are a number of programs that the state government actually keep updated. So we actually have access via the Main Roads website. So we actually, I think our latest version is called Web Crash. And so it does take a little while for the paperwork to get through on that system. But we always, when we go about assessing these projects, we make sure we contact those that enter the data to when it was last entered, whether they've got a backlog of entry, so that we know whether we're looking at the most up-to-date data.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions to this report? Not. GM, I'll ask you to introduce the recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation is that Council acknowledge formal notification from the Department of Transport and Main Roads of Council submission under the Australian Government Black Spot Program 2021 to 2022 with the following 5 projects approved for funding. Beachmont Road, east of Rhodes Road, Witherin, change 6170 to change 8060, approved funding $181,000. Mundilla Road and Ellis and Jackson Road intersection Melora, approved funding $664,000. Burnham Street and James Street intersection by Desert, approved funding $198,000. Beachmont Road, 500 metre section north of Farm Grove Road, Beachmont, change 9600 to change 10100, approved funding $209,000. Burnham Street and Ellis Street intersection by Desert, approved funding $493,000 with a total approved funding of $1,745,000.
That sounds better.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, I seek a mover. Councillor Enright, any additional questions? Additional discussion to that? If not, seek a seconder. Councillor West. Councillor Enright, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I speak in support of this recommendation. This is another great example where our federal government provides funds to make our roads safer, and another example of how we can deliver improvements to our road infrastructure in an earlier timeframe with the support of the federal government funds through this Black Spot program.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? If not, councillor, anything further? No. Put the motion, councillors, those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 10.5 on page 90 of your report, GM Council Sustainability. Thank you, by the way, officers, apologies. Thank you for your work in those preparations. Look forward to celebrating the deliveries. Thank you. Apologies, GM.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, councillors and everyone listening, including the executive and the rest of the councillors in the room. Item 10.5 today is the procurement exceptions for 2021-2022. The matter is in open. How it's the report is self-explanatory. These suppliers have been put on this list for varying reasons as to why we're seeking exception for the engagement of these suppliers, and they're detailed in the following reports, Mr. Mayor, including the estimated volume of contracts to be made during the year for these suppliers. The one that I will focus on, given that the plant assessor and Seawash are relatively small, the on the net matter, who currently provide our network services, there is a tender out at the moment, and that's still awaiting finalisation. That was meant to award that to a particular supplier. So the reason why we've kept on the net on the exception list is just to allow the engagement of those until such time that tender has been finalised for the year. I will take any queries to seek further clarity. Otherwise, I take the report as being read and fairly explanatory in nature.
Councillor McCollum, you have a question?
Yeah, can't understand why there was a delay in getting this back to us, seeing that there was only approval until the 30th of June this year, and we're now in August.
In terms of, yeah, I do apologise for the delay in getting this report in. However, the engagement of the suppliers, the on the net one was probably the one that had the major concerns. But the fact that we'd sought legal advice around whether or not the current engagement that was through until 30th of June, whether we could actually engage it for another couple of months. The tender process itself was on the verge of being approved and awarded, and that might have been only a couple of months back. But there was other extenuating matters around that tender that required an extension of that, in which case the on the net end up being included on that list.
So the plan assessor and the Seawash only had approval until the 30th of June, though.
That's correct.
And we're now in August.
Yeah, I do apologise that
they didn't. Technically, if we only had approval, or if council only had approval to do this until the 30th of June, and we made payments outside of that time, are we going against our policy?
It's, I guess, given the volume of them for completeness, our current policy states anything, you can just get 2 verbal quotes for up to 15,000. So the volumes of those 2 suppliers, given their nature, it would have just required just 2 verbal quotes. There was no formal process given the level of them.
Okay, I'm just a little concerned that we seem to be asking in retrospect a few times now on issues that should have come to council And this is fairly straightforward, I would have thought, to just get an approval to extend it. So I'm just getting a little bit concerned that things are coming to the councillors, asking forgiveness for going outside.
Yeah, look, certainly take those comments on notice, and again put the apology there that should have come in earlier. But we did try to work on that last tender as much as we could to try and not include those on the list. Council would be aware that the list was a lot more exhaustive in previous, and we tried to minimise the number of these actually coming forward to council. But certainly take those comments on notice.
Thank you.
Any further points, questions to the content of the report? Thank you. Then ask you to introduce the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for item 10.5 is that council resolve to engage the following suppliers under section 235 of the Local Government Regulation 2012 during the 2021-2022 financial year. Those suppliers being Plant Assessor for the services of Plant Safety Risk Assessment Services, the exception being under 235B, and for this to expire at 30th of June 2022. The second supplier being Seawash Proprietary Limited for the services of rental of land under exception 235A, and for this to expire 30th of June 2022. And lastly, the third supplier being On The Net for the services of broadband and network services under exception 235B, and for this to expire through until 31st of the 12th, 2021.
Thank you. Seek a mover. Councillor McConnell. Any additional questions, councillors? Additional discussion to that item? Otherwise, I seek a seconder. Councillor Chalk. Wish to speak, Councillor McConnell?
I am going to, as I said, move this one, and I will approve it. But I hope that in the future, a better a system is done with council officers to ensure that this sort of stuff comes to us prior to the end of an approval date. Thank you.
Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? No, we put to motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 10.6, page 95 of your report, councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 10.6 is the matter considering the Local Government Association Queensland Annual Conference 2021 and the motions that are seeking endorsement from council to be submitted towards the annual conference. The report contains all the motions that were put together by governance. I will acknowledge the presence of John Pakalis, our Principal Specialist Governance and Assurance, who authored the report and is able to take any further queries should they arise. There's a total of 6 motions that have been drafted for consideration today, Mr. Mayor, and each of those are quite relevant to the Scenic Rim and pertinent to seek consideration for submission at the conference. I'll take the reports have been read, and should there be any clarifications sought, the one proviso is that, Mr. Mayor, that given the fact that the meeting was adjourned from the 3rd of August, the submission deadline is for today for these to be submitted. Otherwise, if there's matters pertaining that doesn't meet recommendation, then we can seek an extension from the CEO of LGAQ should that be necessary.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions to the report for clarification? Councillor West.
Thank you, General Manager. I was just with pertaining to the first motion. I just wondered if you might just mention for those listening at home why we are putting this motion forward about the rail interface agreement. It's kind of, thank you.
That's GM Asset Environment sustainability, I think, yes.
Yes, thank you, Councillor West. We're putting that first motion forward because there is competing priorities between the safety requirements of officers when they actually work close to the rail line. So what we're trying to achieve through this motion is actually bring in line where the obligations of the rail authority to make it more aligned with our road obligations. So if you work within 3 metres or thereabouts of the rail, you need to make special application, have an officer of authority from the rail authority on site. If it would be much more appropriate if the responsibilities for the maintenance of that section of road sat with the rail authority. So that's very detailed why we've put forward this motion. It also assists assists in the smooth interconnection between the interface between the road and rail.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional points for clarification, councillors? Okay. If not, Jim, I'll ask you to introduce this recommendation. Councillors, given the nature of the content, I am going to ask you, GM, to read all of the wording, not just the headings on this occasion. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. No problems about that. The recommendation for item 10.6 is that Council adopt the proposed motion for submission to the Local Government Association Queensland Annual Conference 2021. Motion number 1, Queensland Government review of the rail interface agreements. That the Local Government Association of Queensland lobby the Queensland Government to A, review and amend Section 251 of the Transport Infrastructure Act 1994 to more properly clarify that the rail interface manager retains responsibility for the area defined as the danger zone.
So that's rail infrastructure manager.
Rail infrastructure manager retains responsibility for the area defined as the danger zone at all times, and particularly where such zone intersects a road corridor. And B, review and update the agreement for management of railroad interface risks between rail infrastructure managers, such as Queensland Rail Limited, and specific councils as road managers, based on A, above. Such review and update process in considering both operation and effectiveness of such agreements should achieve an outcome that properly reflects contemporary work practices, responsible delineation of risk scope and management responsibility, and legal implications. Motion 2, SEQ regional plan and state planning policy, financial burdens on councils to manage large environmental precincts and corridors. That the Local Government Association of Queensland lobby the Queensland Government to recognise the shared responsibility for preservation, maintenance and management of environmental precincts and corridors that are recognised as vital to mitigating climate change and preserving biodiversity, through the provision of recurring funding to councils where they are typically carrying this burden at ratepayer expense. Motion 3, SEQ regional plan and state planning policy, review the limitations on minimum subdivision for rural land. That the Local Government Association of Queensland lobby Queensland Government to review the limitations on minimum subdivisions for rural land to better reflect true merit of specific areas to be preserved as highest beneficial use as rural land or converted to other land use offering more sustainable futures. Motion 4, SEQ regional plan and state planning policy, strategically preserve future transport corridors in potential growth areas. That the Local Government Association of Queensland lobby the Queensland Government to support the Queensland Government's strategic sustainable growth requirements by identifying, preserving and maintaining strategic land corridors for purposes including transport system future needs. Motion 5, bushfire hazard compliance, cost recovery for remedial work. That the Local Government Association of Queensland lobby the Queensland Government to A, amend the Fire and Emergency Services Act 1990 to recognise notices to reduce fire risks as remedial notices under Local Government Act 2009, where unpaid costs for remedial work for non-compliance undertaken by Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, QFES, become a rates debt over the property. And B, amend the Local Government Act 2009 to facilitate a partnership arrangement between the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services and local governments, where the rates debt for the unpaid costs of remedial work can be recovered by the local governments on behalf of the QFES. Motion 5, proactive planning, 6, proactive planning and operations to mitigate the threat of bushfires on Queensland government controlled land. That the Local Government Association of Queensland lobby the Queensland Government to immediately improve proactive planning and operations, including the allocations of appropriate and necessary resources in mitigating the threat of bushfire on Queensland government controlled land that threatens local communities. These motions will be supported by a detailed background and information submitted through the Local Government Association of Queensland online portal.
Thank you. I seek a mover. Councillor McConnell. Any additional questions? Any additional discussion of those items? I seek a seconder. Councillor West. Councillor McConnell, you wish to speak?
Yeah, I will on this one, Mayor. I think these are really important motions that are highly needed within our region, considering the bushfires of the past couple of years, and hopefully the lobbying by the LGAQ will have some sort of impact at state level to assist the local government, who does all the work, to better educate the community on everyone's responsibilities in regards to reducing the fire risks within the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally to this motion? I will just exercise leave to add. I'm very supportive of putting these forward. In doing so, would note that the process from here goes to the a motions committee, and there's no guarantee that these get to the final agenda. However, I concur with Councillor McConnell that the matters we're putting forward here both address fundamental strategic issues around risk for our region, both in terms of protection of the environment for the future, effective land management, effective fire risk management, as well as effective risk management for our, particularly our people when we're having to work in conjunction with rail corridors. So there's quite a mix of matters here that represent some underlying issues that ultimately all at present transfer risk either to our community or to us as a council, and put a burden that we can't reasonably sustain on our own. And these motions give an opportunity to change that conversation, so there's a proper strategic balance of that risk management with the state agencies particularly who play a part. Councillor McInnes, you wish to speak additionally?
Yes, Mayor, and like yourself, fully supportive of these 5 resolutions, but it does worry me that they, where there's 95 or 98% of the motions agreed to by everybody at the annual conference, and they these end up in the the great motions in the sky, never to be hit the earth and to be done anything with, unfortunately. And it's all good of intent from everybody associated, I've no doubt, but they just never seem to see the light of the day. Maybe it's climate change that gets to them or something, but unfortunately, it's we don't get this. There's a lot of resolutions that are passed usually by 90+% of the people and very overwhelming support, but they never hit the mark.
Thank you. Councillor, you wish to close, Councillor McConnell?
No, thank you.
Put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to page 112, item 10.7. GM Council Sustainability, back with you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.7 relates to the presentation of the report following the staging of the Audit and Risk Committee meetings. These have been late sort of coming to council, given that the last one of the meetings was back in 26th of August 2020. That was just on the basis where there was some change in staff, change in legislation around closed meetings. I will remind that that by default, Audit and Risk Committee meetings are confidential in nature, the way under the prescribed in legislation. So with the change in October, dealings with meetings of confidential nature, we did have to seek some clarity around how to progress this, not only from a legal aspect, but also from the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee and subsequent members. But the report today, Mr. Mayor, provides a report on the Audit and Risk Committee meetings held on the 26th of August 2020, 25th of November 2020, 18th of February 2021, 10th of May 2021, and the last meeting on the 17th of June 2021 as well. It should be noted that one of the matters that pertain to these meetings being tabled is in recent times, since the refresh and refocus, these have been reported back to council. Prior to that, there was no formal presentation back to council of these Audit Risk Committee reports. We'll acknowledge council's Principal Specialist, Internal Audit and Assurance, Scott Williams, is present. Should there be any clarity sought on any of these matters?
Thank you. Questions to the report, councillors? Councillor McConnell?
Yeah, just a quick one. Are we ahead of the game again? Does other councils have this out there?
I haven't compared other councils, but it is a legislative requirement that the council is provided with a report from the Audit and Risk Committee. As I said, with the refresh and focus, that was reinvigorated, that the matters emanating from the Audit and Risk Committee be provided to the full council for adoption, but endorsement. But I'm not familiar about the other councils. I know it's a legislative requirement, and that was just reinstated on that basis.
Okay, thank you.
Question to Councillor Enright.
Mayor, could I ask the GM to please provide attendance at the Audit and Risk Committee members at the 5 Audit and Risk Committee meetings outlined in this report?
Just the actual attendance, Councillor Enright?
Attendance of the members.
Of the members?
Audit and Risk Committee.
Okay. So, yes, so for clarity, the members, the formal members of the Audit and Risk Committees are comprised of the external member being the chair. And for these meetings, that was Mr. Stephen Coates. The additional external member for these meetings was Melissa Jacobs, Mayor Christensen as a representative, and also in between there was a change between Councillor Swamborough and Councillor Enright for the very last meeting on 17th of June 2021. The attendances for those, the meeting on the 26th of August 2020, which was in the midst of COVID, was undertaken via Skype, where we could facilitate. That was fully attended by all the members indicated. the meeting on the 25th of November 2020, the chair, the external member and the mayor attended with an apology from Councillor Swanborough. 18th of February 2021, the same, attended by the chair, the external member, the mayor Christensen. Councillor Swanborough was an apology. 10th of May 2021, the chair, external member, the mayor, Councillor Swanborough's apology. 17th of the 6th 2021, following, so the chair, the external member and the mayor, and at this particular time, Councillor Enright, you became the member on that committee and attended by yourself, following the stepping down of Councillor Swanborough from that Audit Risk Committee representation. Is that what you were after, Councillor?
Thank you.
Thank you, GM. Further questions, councillors? Okay, if you would then please introduce the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for 10.7 is that Council receive the report provided on the Audit and Risk Committee meetings held on 26th of August 2020, 25th of November 2020, 18th of February 2021, 10th of May 2021, and 17th of June 2021.
Okay, I seek a mover. Councillor West, thank you. Any additional questions to this matter? Councillor Enright?
Mayor, may I make a comment at this stage?
Just see if there's any questions first, then I'll... yes, comment?
Mayor, I am, in considering the attendance of these 5 meetings, the content of this report and the specific matters reviewed at these 5 Audit and Risk Committee meetings, other than yourself who attended all meetings, I'm perplexed that there were only 2 of the 5 meetings where we had another councillor present at these meetings. I attended on the 17th of June 2021, following my appointment as a member of the 4-person Audit and Risk Committee in May. Councillor Swanborough attended one of the 4 meetings, being the 26th of August. There is an expectation that we are to receive and endorse this report. However, 3 of the meetings did not have a second councillor present, and I guess it's for the chair of the meeting, it's probably not as desirable for you to be the mover of a motion, but may I ask Councillor Swanborough for his input into the context of this report for that meeting that he attended?
You may ask, and the councillor can choose to respond or not.
Look, I make no comment in relation to Councillor Enright's questions. I'm not sure where he's going with all of this.
Thank you, councillor. I'm just going back to, so now no further questions. I seek a seconder. Councillor McGuinness. Councillor West, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to say, it's very positive that the community are now able to see the minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee meetings. I know we as councillors always have, and I just really wanted to mention also too that before legislatively this was a requirement to have an Audit and Risk Committee. Scenic Regional Council have always had one regardless from the inception, which was certainly a very proactive move.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against the motion? Anyone wishing to speak additionally to seek leave to speak additionally to this motion? Whilst I note your comment, councillor, I would just observe that over the 5 years of being involved it's pleasing to see that the focus of the Audit Risk Committee has improved and has shifted to a wider range of issues. It does create a more challenging program, and with limited resource, getting the right focus out of that. But it certainly has continued to evolve and improve the value that it can bring in terms of, as an Audit and Risk Committee should, getting the balance right in considering risks as well as just auditing of process, and a focus around continuous improvement. And I commend the motion, and just would also observe that having an independent chair and an independent member, along with some guest participants from the likes of QAO, makes this a very robust process that gives confidence for me, which is one of the reasons I'm at this regularly, as well as confidence for the community about the robustness of our underlying processes, being on the continuous improvement focus as a council. Anyone else seeking leave to speak? Otherwise, Councillor, do you wish to close?
No, thank you.
We put the motion then, councillors. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 10.8 on page 121.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 10.8 is the council consideration or acknowledging the annual internal audit plan for 2021-2022. Following on the back of the previous matter, this pertains to the Audit and Risk Committee meetings and outlines what the Principal Specialist Internal Audit and Improvement is planning to undertake in terms of the audits for this financial year. As you can see on page 122, they're listed accordingly, and what the objective of those reviews are, Mr. Mayor, and again acknowledge the presence of Scott in the room should there be any matters pertaining to seeking additional clarity, if not already contained in the report. The formulation of this audit plan has been in deep consultation, obviously, with the Audit and Risk Committee themselves, to ensure that the organisation is getting that right benefits out of the internal audit and the due process necessary.
Thank you for that introduction. Questions, councillors? I just would make an observation, or perhaps invite an observation. It's not possible to target every area every year, so this is part of a rolling program. Do you wish to add any comment to the report as the officer responsible?
Certainly happy to. So, yes, absolutely. A key thing I wanted to do when I picked this up to work on it was to try to bring an objectivity to the process. It does involve choices. It involves judgment as to where best to try to direct my efforts over the coming year. This plan represents a process and a scoring system and a prioritisation that's then discussed with others. And I feel comfortable, although the process was slightly shortened versus usual, that this does represent a good plan for the organisation and will hit useful areas in the year ahead.
Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, just on your commentary, this is the annual part of a 3-year audit plan, and given the just to add further, given the I guess the vacancy in that position, there were a number of items that were considered to make sure that they didn't fall off the radar. So there had to be a reshuffle of some of those matters to make sure that those matters were captured accordingly.
Thank you. Would you introduce the recommendation now?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for item 10.8 is that Council acknowledge the list of annual internal audit plan 2021-2022 review topics, which has been endorsed by the Audit and Risk Committee and approved by the Chief Executive Officer.
Seeker mover, Councillor Enright. Any additional questions? Any additional discussion to the recommendation? If not, seek a seconder. Councillor McConnell. Wish to speak, Councillor Enright?
Thank you, Mayor. I think this report outlines a very structured and well-considered annual internal audit plan, and I have had the opportunity to look at that in greater detail, and I'm very happy with what he's presented. Congratulate Scott on the work that he's done in putting in this structured program over the next 3 years, and certainly endorse what is outlined here for the next 12 months.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? I would just take the opportunity to echo Councillor Enright's comments. As part of a rolling program, these are some critical buttons. I would just also, in supporting this, also remind and encourage councillors, and I know some councillors have taken this opportunity, and I believe Councillor McConnell, you'll be joining us as an observer for the next time, and I thank you for making yourself available in that way. And obviously, given some COVID restrictions, if we get tight for numbers with guests, then we might just need people to RSVP so we can plan accordingly. But otherwise, it's a very good thing for councillors to come and understand how that unfolds as well, if you're able to. Thank you. Any wish to close? And those in favour of the motion? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. There are no confidential matters for us to consider today. Thank you to those who've joined us today in the digital gallery. Thank you, councillors. We have pushed through to the end of our agenda, and I therefore declare the resumed meeting of the 3rd of August now closed, and look forward to joining you tomorrow for the next scheduled ordinary meeting. Thank you.